And let's return to the general election, shall we? Because Labour say they will ban under 16-year-olds from buying those highly caffeinated energy drinks as part of a series of commitment to improve children's health.
We're joined now by Wes Streeting, who is the Shadow Health Secretary. Morning to you, Mr. Streeting. So, a ban on energy drink sales to under 16s, a ban on junk food ads before 9 o'clock at night. How do you think this will impact children's health? And isn't there already a code in place, a voluntary code from supermarkets where they don't sell caffeinated drinks to under 16s?
Yeah, and the key word there is voluntary. And I applaud supermarkets like Sainsbury's who've sought to do the right thing on energy drinks by banning the sales to under 16, restricting sales in that way. But that's not the case everywhere. And the reason we've chosen to take this step on those high caffeine energy drinks over 150 milligrams per litre is because we've heard very clearly what parents and teachers have told us about the impact that these highly caffeinated products, if I take, a can like this, half a litre, that's got more caffeine in it than 5 cans of Coca-Cola. And that's really serious in terms of the impact it has on children's concentration, the impact it's having on their sleep, children turning up to school absolutely exhausted or worse still, wired, unable to concentrate. So it's bad for children's learning, it's bad for children's well-being. We applaud those supermarkets that have taken leadership on this, but I think we need consistency everywhere. And what Labour's trying to do more broadly on children's health and well-being is take the action that's needed on the prevention side, so things like reducing their intake of junk food, improving diet and nutrition, make sure we've got good physical activity in our schools, but also making sure that when it comes to treating children's ailments, that we're taking much stronger action, whether that's clearing the waiting list backlog for children on waiting lists with 100,000 extra appointments a year, action on dentistry with 100,000 emergency dentistry appointments for our children, mental health support in every primary and secondary school in the country. We're getting that combination of dealing with the health and well-being crisis that's facing us now, but also trying to improve children's health and well-being in the longer term by taking those important preventative steps.
OK, I just want to pick you up on one thing you mentioned there, guarantee of an extra 100,000 dental appointments for children. How are you going to make that happen? How are you going to fund it and how quickly will it happen?
So we've committed to deliver as the first step on rebuilding NHS dentistry, which is, lots of parts of the country now, we've just got dental deserts. The first step will be 700,000 extra emergency dentistry appointments. 100,000 of those will be earmarked for children. And that is part of a £1.6 billion package we've put forward for the NHS to take action on waiting times. So that particular measure will cost £100 million and will help to make sure that those people who are currently in pain and agony are able to get the emergency dentistry access. What we need to do for the longer term is to rebuild NHS dentistry, and that's going to require contract reform. And I've told the British Dental Association that if Labour wins the next general election, and it's still an if, by the way, we're not taking this for granted, on the Monday after the general election, I'll have the British Dental Association in and we'll begin that process of contract reform, because there are lots of dentists at work out there, but they're all in the private sector because the NHS doesn't pay properly through the contract. So we've got to get some of those dentists back. Otherwise, we're going to end up with this horrible status quo where those who can afford it are going private and those who can't are being left in a poor service for poor people. And by the way, I think that's the wider risk for the NHS if the Conservatives have an unprecedented fifth term in office, is that's what the future of the NHS will look like when you look at how many people are now going private, how long people are waiting, and the extent to which people are now voting with their feet and paying for tests and scans out of their own pockets, in some cases even borrowing and getting themselves into debt to pay for treatment. That is not a future for our National Health Service that Labour wants to see.
And on energy drinks, how far are you prepared to go? Will you ban them completely? And how would you then police that?
No, we're not looking at a complete ban. And when it comes to adults, we want to treat people like responsible adults. I'm not interested in kind of wagging my finger and telling people what to do. Obviously, we want to encourage people in terms of their exercise, in terms of their diet and nutrition, to make healthier choices. That's in all of our interests. Where we are being far more interventionist is when it comes to our children, because when you look at the state of children's health in our country today, I think it should give us really serious cause for concern, whether that's on childhood obesity, whether that's on mental health and well-being. And in terms of the enforcement of this measure, which is a ban on sales to under 16s, trading standards will enforce that in the way that they do with things like underage sales of alcohol or tobacco. So if retailers are caught selling to children, then they will face fines. If they end up in front of a magistrate court, they could end up with even heftier fines than a fixed penalty notice. And of course, if people flout the law, then they can lose their licences too. So we are taking this seriously. And I think this is action that parents and teachers will welcome, because they are seeing the consequences of kids becoming far too wired and far too dependent on very caffeinated drinks that are impacting on their sleep, their learning, their concentration and their well-being.
We've heard from the Institute for Fiscal Studies, haven't we? They've criticised both you and the Conservatives for your unwillingness to consider tax increases to raise the extra money that would be needed for any new government. You say you're not putting up corporation tax and VAT, but can you make the same guarantee for capital gains tax here on this programme now?
I can certainly confirm, our manifesto's out on Thursday, I can certainly confirm that not a single policy in that manifesto requires Labour to increase capital gains tax. And the reason we've set out our triple lock on income tax, national insurance and VAT is we wanted to send a really strong message to working people who've been absolutely clobbered by the Conservatives, who've used those taxes as their first and last resort, always picking the pockets of working people, always pleading poverty on behalf of the wealthier, who Labour are going to ask to pay a bit more to fund our policies. We want to give working people that assurance that Labour is not going to increase those taxes, because we know people can't afford it. And to be honest, you look at our shadow cabinet, whether it's Keir Starmer, our leader, Angela Rayner, our deputy leader, myself, Bridget Phillipson, the shadow education secretary, we've all come from working class families and backgrounds. We know how hard people are struggling at the moment, and we know that even if people are looking at the state of their schools or their local NHS services, they'll be thinking, well, I hope my taxes aren't going to go up to pay for that, because I literally can't afford it right now. And that's why the sorts of choices we're making are about clamping down on tax avoidance, closing the non-dom loopholes the government have still left in, asking the big oil and gas giants to pay a real windfall tax. Those are fairer choices, and those are fairer choices than the Conservatives are making. And today, of course, the Conservatives are setting out their manifesto. I mean, I'd urge people to look really carefully at this enormous and desperate attempt to buy people's votes at this election with a whole raft of unfunded spending commitments and tax cuts. This is Liz Truss's mini-budget on steroids. And we've seen the damage that unfunded, uncosted spending commitments make on people's bills. That's the big tax bombshell that's waiting if the Conservatives get a fifth term.
One of the things that they are talking about is a 2p cut in national insurance. You've mentioned national insurance. Would you match that cut?
We're not able to make that commitment today because the money simply isn't there. And I think Rishi Sunak should level with people that the money isn't there. I think he's taking people for fools. They can see that national insurance has been put up time and again by Conservative prime ministers and chancellors to pay the price of their economic recklessness and vandalism. And I just think at this stage, you look at the state of their campaign, you look at the state of their spending commitments, the sheer desperation that's coming out. Re-electing these chancellors will be like giving the matches back to the arsonists and say, go and finish the job. The choice at this election is now between an irresponsible Conservative party with a record of economic vandalism or a responsible Labour Party that's being honest with the country about hard choices. That barely a week has gone by for me as a Labour politician without going on a TV or radio programme and people saying, well, why won't you fund this great policy or that great policy that people might want to see. And the truth is that the money isn't there. There are lots of things we might like to do, but unless this is something that we know we can deliver and the country can afford, we will not include those sorts of policies in our manifesto. And that should give people the confidence on Thursday when they see Labour's manifesto that every promise we make is a promise we can keep and a promise that you can afford. Rishi Sunak can't say that today, and if he does, you'll know he's lying to you.
Wes Streeting, thank you very much indeed. We will be putting those points to Mel Stride, who was talking to us for the Conservatives at 7:30 this morning.